In public, Hitler speaks of restoring German pride in the right of a superior people to rule over the masses. Hitler also speaks of Lebensraum, or living space for Germany to grow. Behind closed doors, his military commanders learn the true danger and vicious intent of these words. His ambitions go far beyond land Germany lost in the war. He wants all of Eastern Europe. And he is impatient to the point of risking the start of another world war. On March 12, 1938, Hitler marches his troops into Austria, a former ally, without firing a shot. With the world watching, he now turns his gaze further east, demanding that the Sudetenland area of Czechoslovakia, once a part of Germany, be returned.
Hitler's view towards the Sudetenland was simple. The population there was German, and he was going to collect all Germans under the rule of Berlin. The Czechs had acquired the territory unfairly, and now he was going to put things right.
Hitler goes further, threatening to simply march his army into the area on his own timetable. His aggressive approach, almost an ultimatum, rattles world leaders. One of those leaders is British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Well known as a practical, honest, and trustworthy politician, he's in many ways the polar opposite of Adolf Hitler. While Chamberlain is sympathetic to German claims, he sees Hitler's saber-rattling as dangerous. England suffered terrible losses defeating Germany in World War I, and Chamberlain dreads the thought of another war.
Chamberlain believed that the world's problems could be resolved through the application of common sense and reason, and through one-on-one negotiation. He assumed the good faith of other statesmen.
In September of 1938, armies across the region are on high alert. Chamberlain decides to act as an envoy for the rest of Europe and try to defuse the situation, or at the very least, buy Europe some time. Taking the very first plane ride of his life, he arrives in Germany and meets Hitler face to face.
For Chamberlain, this is a huge moment. He believes that he is now going to accomplish peace in his time. He thinks that he's going to negotiate with Hitler. He believes that Hitler is reasonable and that if he gives Hitler everything he wants, that Hitler will then stop making demands and he will have achieved his goal of peace.
Neville Chamberlain was willing to redraw Germany's borders in accordance with the principle of the self-determination of peoples, so that those borders incorporated Germans currently living outside the Reich.
However, Adolf Hitler must be patient rather than risk causing a war. Sensing he'll now get what he wants, Hitler agrees to wait, promising that the Sudetenland is his only ambition. Having read and marked up Mein Kampf, Chamberlain decides to look past evidence that this is an outright lie.
At the end of the first meeting, Chamberlain writes to his sister and he tells his sister, "I've looked Hitler in the eyes and I believe I can trust this man."
With armies still mobilized across Europe, Hitler and Chamberlain meet 2 more times, hoping to work out a deal. The high stakes are noted across the ocean, too. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, pressing for a peaceful solution, writes Hitler directly with his concerns. On September 29, 1938, a final conference is held in Munich. The parties agree to allow the Sudetenland to be transferred from Czechoslovakia to Germany. War is averted. Through the threat of war and deception, Hitler gets what he wants. Believing diplomacy has worked, Chamberlain approaches Hitler to secure what he hopes will be binding peace.
Chamberlain asks Hitler if he can meet Hitler later that evening in his apartment. Hitler says fine. Chamberlain goes, and when he's at Hitler's apartment, he whips out a piece of paper that says that Germany and England will never fight each other again.
Chamberlain asked Hitler to sign this document. Hitler agreed, but it meant very different things to the 2 statesmen involved.
Chamberlain goes home. He waves this piece of paper. He's very proud of it. He believes he's accomplished what he set out to do. He thinks he's achieved peace in his time, and it's something that's very popular.
Hitler left the meeting. His foreign minister Ribbentrop came up to him and expressed concern that he might have committed himself to something. Hitler's response was, "That piece of paper is of no further significance whatsoever."
Having tested their nerve, Hitler feels his adversaries are weak and afraid of war. Swallowing up Eastern Europe might be even easier than he thought. But the other leaders in Europe are making their own plans. They are not fools when it comes to the gamesmanship that precedes war, even if it involves lies, shadowy figures, and a secret operation inside Germany itself. By October 1938, Germany under Adolf Hitler is growing. Through bluff, deception, and the threat of war, Europe hands him the Sudetenland. It's a stepping stone to his true dream of a greater Germany. Hitler feels European leaders are spineless, and if they caved once, they'll cave again. 5 months later, tossing aside the Munich Agreement, Hitler orders his army to keep on marching eastwards. Meeting little resistance, he quickly swallows up the rest of Czechoslovakia. The move stuns the world. In England, a shocked Chamberlain is left betrayed.
In March of 1939, by seizing the rest of Czechoslovakia, Hitler made it obvious that he had designs in the rest of the continent, not just that area populated by Germans.
As the rest of Europe braces for war, Hitler turns his gaze squarely toward his next target: Poland. Restored as an independent state in 1918, Poland is led by Edward Śmigły-Rydz. While Hitler's ambition is to wipe Poland off the map, he publicly focuses on a more reasonable goal: territory Germany lost at the end of World War I. He demands that Poland return the city of Danzig. Śmigły-Rydz, painfully aware of what just happened to Czechoslovakia, flat out rejects Hitler's request. Śmigły-Rydz gets vital allies. In the House of Commons, Chamberlain states that Britain will support Poland if it is attacked. The French also guarantee their allegiance.
At this point, Chamberlain realizes that Hitler and the Nazis can no longer be trusted. So when Chamberlain gives the guarantee to Poland, Hitler is very, very angry. He didn't think that the British would ever stand up to him. He just didn't think that they would do that. That was not part of his vision of what the British were all about.
Hitler pounded the table angrily and stated, "I will brew them a devil's potion."
British rearmament, at first a precaution, is now a preparation for war. Pouring half of the government's revenues into the armed forces, Chamberlain orders a military buildup, including the Spitfire, Hurricane fighter planes, and a radar net surrounding Great Britain. Other leaders in Europe and the United States are also growing their armies in response to the Nazi threat. Knowing his adversaries are preparing for war, Hitler acts quickly. He tells his commanders to get ready for an invasion of Poland within the year. Now facing his first real opposition on the international stage, Hitler feels he needs a concrete reason to attack.
Hitler is of the belief that potentially France and Britain may waver as the guarantors of Polish independence if an incident might be created which will give them a way out.
Deception has worked for Hitler before, and it could work again. Now numbering 1.5 million strong, the soldiers rally to Hitler's speeches and swear their allegiance to the Nazi cause.
Es ist das glanzvolle Tag der Aufrichtung einer neuen großen Volksgemeinschaft. Über alle Gebiete hinweg, die Freitag, die Stadt und Land zusammenfasst, vor allem stehen lässt, freies Wehr und Waffen.
Although Hitler tells the world that his troop movements are only training exercises, his impressive military might is primed to strike. Like in the past, Hitler talks peace, but has built his army for war.
Hitler has a very aggressive timetable. He's something of a hypochondriac. He believes that he's going to die soon. The other reason is that Germany's been rearming now for a number of years, and the British and French have not yet caught up, and Hitler wants to take advantage of that situation.
Hitler tells his inner circle that a full-scale invasion of Poland will take place on August 26th, an attack that will be justified. He's setting the stage for an intense assault deep into Poland. The German Third Army in the north, as well as Army Group South, will storm towards Warsaw, while the Fourth Army will pierce the Polish corridor. A powerful concentration of fast-moving forces designed to penetrate deep behind enemy lines. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The goal? To destroy Poland and wipe it from the map.
Hitler asked his military leaders to wage a war of annihilation against the Poles. He stated that they would kill without mercy every man, woman, and child of Polish descent or language.
The German people are also primed with a propaganda campaign that demonizes the enemy to the east.
Many of these stories would have been exaggerated or puffed up, even if there was an element of truth to them. But their net effect was that German soldiers had a very negative view of Poles.
These false provocations were used by the Germans to suggest that the Poles had aggressive intentions towards Germany or actually violating German territory.
Smigly-Ritz knows his troops didn't attack Germany. It has to be another act of deception from Hitler. Under pressure from Britain and France, he's risked the security of his nation by going out of his way not to provoke the German dictator.
The Polish army was mobilized on August 30th, then under international pressure forced to demobilize, and then it had to remobilize again. The result was chaos and troops going back and forth from and to the front. Put the Poles at an enormous disadvantage because probably only half the Polish army was ready for combat when the Germans invaded.
Hitler has his excuse to attack, his excuse to invade Poland. As dawn breaks, the sound of war is in the air. It is time for the rest of the world to act. September 1st, the Polish town of Wieluń is heavily bombed. More than 1,200 civilians are killed in an act of terror designed to demoralize the Polish population.
The Germans deployed massive force against the Poles. They brought in 1.5 million soldiers from 4 different staging areas. They also used the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, to level cities that were in no way strategically important.
Right from the beginning, military operations were directed against Polish civilians. There were over 500 villages torched, over 16,000 military executions.
Hitler claims that he is acting in self-defense.
What's striking when the German soldiers get to Poland is how quickly they engage in brutal actions against Poles and Jews, and so it seems like the Nazi propaganda was very effective.
In England, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain knows the German dictator all too well. He sees Hitler's false flag operation at Gleiwitz as just that, a fabrication, a dirty trick to justify a war.
Chamberlain makes a speech in which he declares that the blame for this war rests with one individual, Adolf Hitler.
To Poland, it doesn't matter. Facing Hitler's overwhelming force and brutality, Smigly-Ritz and his undermanned and ill-equipped Polish troops are forced to retreat on many fronts.
Smigly-Ritz, although a competent commander, quickly lost control of the battle. Polish communications were poor, and as a result of that, Smigly-Ritz quickly was isolated from what was going on at the front. The retreats of the Polish army quickly descended into routs because the Polish units were unable to be in contact with one another.
By September 8th, Just 1 week after the start of the invasion, German forces reached the outskirts of Warsaw, the Polish capital.
There were a number of important points of resistance in the September campaign. The most famous is Wiesna, where 600 or 700 Poles stood up against 42,000 Germans for 3 days. All the Poles died, and the last soldier of Poland blew himself up with a grenade.
With losses mounting, Śmigły-Rycz is still counting on British and French help. Help that is not coming.
France promised to invade Germany within 15 days of the outbreak of war. Britain promised to respond to the bombing of Polish cities by bombing German ones. Neither was in a position to carry out its guarantees. They were serious about their commitment to Poland, but they recognized that Polish salvation would depend upon Allied victory in the broader conflict.
As Polish resistance collapsed, Śmigły-Rycz was in a desperate psychological position.
Facing Germany alone, Śmigły-Rycz gets more devastating news. The Soviet army attacks Poland from the east. With his country being carved up by 2 large armies, Śmigły-Rycz retreats across the border into Romania as Warsaw falls.
Hitler made a speech in Danzig. He stated that Poland would never rise again in the form of the Treaty of Versailles, that this was guaranteed both by Germany and by the Soviet Union.
By late 1939, an independent Poland is just a memory, a casualty of Hitler's ruthless ambition for Lebensraum and a greater Germany, and the world is engulfed in war.
Hitler got the war he wanted, brutal and vicious. By late 1939, the invasion of Poland was over and a world war was just getting started. Nobody knew how or when it would end. Looking back, as the world stood on the edge of war, it was clear that Hitler was willing to deceive and murder innocent civilians and even his own people to achieve his goals, a fact world leaders refused to admit until it was much too late. Hitler's methods, including his use of false flag operations, delivered him the support from his countrymen while holding his enemies at bay. Against evil, appeasement never works. This lesson carried over into Western negotiations in Korea, Vietnam, and even today in how we deal with terrorists. A lesson we paid a high price for and must never forget.